So I guess while I'm out here, we could talk a little bit about how to plan your paddle trip, how to plan your paddle routes while you're out paddling when it comes to things like winds and waves and tides and such. So as you can see, today is a rather windy day. It's supposed to be 6 meters per second roughly for most of the day, and I was aware from the onset before this paddle that you know, on the way out, because I'm doing a really long paddle trip today, I'm gonna have the wind against me mostly. So it's coming from the west, and it's gonna be like that for most of the day. And in this case, I'm kind of adjusting my paddle trip based on what I want to take photos and video of. So it's not optimal. But if I didn't have that as a priority, then if I want to spend as little energy as possible, then obviously I want to minimize the wind that I have against me and the waves and such. So in this case, I had two options. I could go right over there, which is around the island of Cherson on the west side. I chose to go on the east side. If I had gone on the west side, as you can see over there, then I could have gone closer to land, stayed close to land, all across the border over there, so to speak, and as such had some protection from the wind for much of the paddle. Maybe not full protection, but it wouldn't have been the wind against me like this. In this case, I chose to go the other way, which is fine, just because I wanted to paddle a short stretch that I hadn't paddled before, and I wanted to photograph a few things over there while it was still light out. So obviously that's also a valid consideration. If there are things you want to see while you're out paddling, then you plan your route accordingly, of course, and you take into account things like wind and whatever conditions you might expect if there are tides and such, and you balance those. So for example, in front of me over there is the Royal Palace of Drottningholm. So if I really wanted to get shots of that, I might be going there first. I paddled there a number of times. I'm still gonna pass it on my way back, and it might be darker, but that's fine, because I mean, I've been there quite a few times. At this point, what will make the most sense is to go over to the island over here, get some protection from the wind, paddle alongside it, and then continue paddling westwards. I'm still gonna have the wind against me for the most part, but at least I'm gonna try and stick to the north side, which will allow a little bit of wind protection, maybe because of some land masses over there. So that's simply something that you look at on the map before going out, of course, and while out. And if I wasn't now close to the city, in waters that I'm mostly familiar with, then you know, having a map here in a waterproof pouch would really help as well. So not being reliant on a mobile phone and Google Maps and whatever that might not work as you would hope. Having a map along on your kayak, either a waterproof map or a map in a waterproof pouch, or both, that really helps. Of course, you need to have your compass with you, and you need to estimate proper directions and distances, which is kind of a learning curve and a learning path over time. But it's something that's worth a lot of thought before you go out. For example, right now, I'm all of a sudden in shelter from the wind here. So you can tell the difference from being quite windy. For the moment, I have some reprieve for a little while where it's quite calm, enormously relaxed. And in this little passage between the islands here, I'm also mostly protected from boats. Whereas when I come out into the larger canal here, or open stretch of water, you know, you're gonna have a lot of boat traffic, at least earlier in summer. So over there is a ferry, on the other side was a ferry. Usually there are a lot of motorboats here. And that safety-wise is definitely you wanna take into account. Yeah, you see another ferry over there. So you wanna be on the right side of traffic, correct side of traffic, meaning actually the right side. So you wanna be on the right side in a canal or channel. In this case, a channel. Okay, so definitely taking boat traffic into account. So we're talking about a number of factors here. They're talking about the weather, meaning wind and direction of waves that you might expect. Tides, if you have strong tides where you are located, which way is the tide going, when is it expected to turn, and how does that affect your paddle. You definitely don't want to be paddling against strong tide and wind. It might not even be possible depending on your kayak and how strong that is. So taking into account your craft, your paddle craft, whatever it is, a kayak, an inflatable kayak, folding, hard shell, sit on top, stand-up paddle board, canoe, packraft, whatever it is, you kind of need to be aware of what capacities your kayak or other paddle craft actually has, how fast you can expect to go on a shorter trip or on a longer trip on average, and then make your calculation as to the total amount of kilometers or miles that you can reasonably be expected to paddle based on your capacity and that of your paddle craft. And then taking into account, as we said, wind and weather. Of course, you could have rain coming in depending on the forecasts. You could have, you know, you can't maybe predict a hailstorm, but if there are areas of thunder, obviously you want to stay far away from that. If you have some area where strong wind or rain or snow or whatever is expected, it might be more optimal to avoid that and plan your route accordingly. So for example, at a recent 4-day sea kayaking expedition this summer, we were constantly checking weather forecasts, which is another good point. It's not enough if you're out for a whole day or several days or even half a day to just check weather forecasts before your paddle. You should, if you're taking breaks and you're paddling a longer distance, it makes sense to check for updates during the trip as well and see if anything has changed. On that trip, for example, we had a general sense of how the weather was going to shift during our 4 days, and it was quite dramatic in the sense that it would get worse and worse and really bad on the last day. So with wind gusts up to over, you know, you would have winds maybe up to 12 meters per second and such, and we had open water passages we had to do in the outermost archipelago. It wouldn't have been great to be on unprotected water with say base winds of 9 meters per second or 10 or whatnot. So we kept a close eye on that, and the weather kind of changed the way we expected for the first days. It was really calm on the first day. It got windier with some waves as we headed out into the outer archipelago, further and further out on the second day. Then on the third day it got really windy and we had the wind against us for a while, so we realized that was going to really escalate during the later part of the day, and we're gonna have that wind straight against us. And it was heavy enough as it was for you know, part of the group. It was quite heavy paddling actually, while some of us really enjoyed ourselves, but still, as we knew it was going to get even worse, but subside after a few hours. We took a long lunch break on a sheltered island and kind of rested and waited that out, which worked really well. So once we continued, the worst of the wind had already passed, and we could paddle on in reasonable conditions. Then we decided to actually change our paddle route and avoid the outermost passages, because the weather forecast was simply really worrying actually. And I even received messages from land saying, you know, be safe, it looks to be really dangerous out there. And yeah, we played it safe, as one should, and we adjusted our paddle route to be more you know, avoiding the outermost stretches that we had planned, and then preparing still for a really heavy day with open passages and possibly really strong winds. In the end, even that changed a bit. Some of us were almost a little bit disappointed, because while it was windy and we had some waves, it wasn't as windy as the, you know, really scary forecasts had warned about, and the wind was in a slightly different direction. So in the end, it was still windy, but not quite as bad as we thought it might be. But we made the right call. We did plan according to the information we had. We avoided the obvious risks, and that's exactly what you should do and need to do. So taking into account again then weather forecasts, wind, rain, maybe snow, whatever else, thunder being a major red flag, and basically obstacles or other difficulties along your intended paddle route, shelter that you might use against the wind in terms of islands, and land, as we said, going close to land and being protected against the wind, huge advantage. Making appropriate use of that, and also planning your passages across open large stretches of water if you need to do that, according to your experience of course, and skill set, and how many paddlers you have in the group, and what skills they have, always considering the weakest link, so to speak, the slowest or least proficient paddler, and how skilled everybody is in self-rescue and peer rescue and whatnot. Really important. And then adjusting your paddle trip and route accordingly, taking into account risks that might you know, appear suddenly and be worse than you might have thought about, like boat traffic, motorboats, jet skis. If there's an area where you know is frequented by jet skis, that's something to definitely be really careful about, and perhaps optimally staying very close to land. With boat traffic such as motor boats, fast boats, obviously you want to avoid them. Stay on the right side of traffic, minimize your passages across open water, keeping an eye out in all directions as necessary. And like I would be doing if things were a bit heavier boat traffic wise than it's here. It's not, this is actually not the main route for boats, but once I get to that, I won't be paddling, let's say, diagonally across the channel if I need to, or canal, or open stretch of open water there. I'll try to paddle perpendicular to land with the shortest distance possible across the open water where there's a lot of boat traffic, keeping an eye out and making sure that I'm visible by having visible clothing, visible PFD, visible cap might help, a hat of some sort of visible color. If it's darker, using appropriate lighting, 360 degrees light, and some sort of you know, whatever solutions you might need to employ to make sure that you're visible towards other crafts and behave responsibly. And if you meet another vessel on the water, normally if you're meeting them head on, you turn to the right, meaning starboard, and you normally stick to the right side of a canal if it's more narrow.
11 minuter 30 sekunder. Varv på 5,2 kilometer i timmen. Totalt en timme 12.
All right, and you know, that's the safety part of it. Then of course planning your paddle routes of course takes into account things that you would like to see or areas you want to explore that where you haven't been before or you want to revisit. Again, getting as much information as you can on your map. And if you're using a mobile phone or similar device for checking your GPS location and such, first of all be aware that that might not work if you're a bit further out, and that it's a really good idea to download an offline map like you can do in Google Maps, for example, so that you have that for reference in case you don't have good signal. And in all cases it might be hard to actually read the display of your device properly in strong sunlight or whatever conditions, so not something to rely on. Again, physical map is always a good baseline option. And then again, planning your route according to how long you're out there, with some margin. Remember that you might get tired. You might have to prioritize. You might not be able to see everything that you had planned to see if somebody gets ill or tired or has a slight injury or cramps or pain or whatever. In that case, what are your backup options? Do you have a shorter way back? Can you somehow make it to land if needs be? And if you got there by car to your starting point, are there locations along the route where you could actually get up to public transport like train or bus or whatever and have somebody go back to pick up a car or two and then come to your location if somebody really were to not have the energy or be in too much pain or whatever to continue paddling. Things like that are good to look out for. So in my case, I usually paddle with inflatable kayaks quite a lot, some of them high performance, which really has the advantage of being able to choose your starting location and choose your the final location of your trip, the end point of your trip, fairly flexibly depending on what you want to do. So even sometimes I even adjust my end point during the paddle just out of inspiration, because I can get up on land as long as there's public transport nearby, and that's a huge advantage. But in order for that to work, I kind of will do well to check that out in advance. Where are the bus stops or train stations or whatnot within walking distance from shore? Where are natural landing points? That's not available everywhere, so depending on where you're paddling, it's really important to plan that. On some more remote routes there might be a couple of options, but only a few, and then you don't want to discover too late that you have to paddle 15 kilometers extra to get to a point where you're in a hurry. So doing your research there, really important and really helpful. So if you do have an inflatable or folding kayak, or otherwise a transportable craft like a packraft or whatever, that is another really good advantage that you can use if you do your homework. Of course you can improvise, but you might be unlucky if you haven't done your homework, and maybe you'll find out that things weren't as easy as you thought. You might not be able to get up on land where you thought you might. So using a satellite view on Google Maps, for example, and or some other app where you can really see the terrain data and really see what things look like before you head out, that's really gonna be to your advantage. I was just a few days ago paddling after a group paddle with one other paddler, and we both had inflatable kayaks, and we knew that we could carry them to a train station, so we knew we wanted to continue through some small rivers and creeks, and did that, and then we decided to continue even onwards to a location where none of us had ever gone up on shore before. So looking at the map, it looked like this would be possible, but getting there we realized that there was, there were a lot of reeds everywhere, and when we came close to more residential areas, those were mostly private residences and their docks, so we couldn't really easily get up on land unless it was really an emergency situation. Finally we found one very convenient dock, but it was actually located maybe half a kilometer further out than the initial assessment on the map would have had it. I mean, we couldn't get up where we had hoped to get up. We had to go up on land a little bit later. So the dock was great, but it meant that we had to walk quite a bit further than we had planned. All right, so that's in the end that was a great paddle, and we discovered a new location, and we had done some homework before, so we knew that it was reasonable to assume that we could somehow get up on land over there. But that's the thing. It could have been that all of those were private residences and it wasn't really appropriate to use those facilities, and it was getting dark, and while at least I had proper lighting and such, if that option hadn't worked out, then we might have had to add another 5 kilometers to our paddle route and such. And then if you're heading back with public transport, like you're using an inflatable kayak, for example, you still have to account for the schedule of that as well. Is there a last bus for the day? Is there a time where the train doesn't go anymore? That actually happened to me at one point where I was heading back last year from a night swim event where I was a safety functionary, a safety kayak, and it was such a great day. It was a great night. It was so warm. You had a full moon out. It was just amazing in the water, and even if it was now basically getting closer to midnight, it was 10, 11 something, it was so warm in the air that I felt like I didn't want to stop paddling, so I continued paddling way past midnight, and too late realized that the commuter train during the summer actually stopped passing by that station at a certain point in time. The last commuter train actually was somewhere there after midnight, so I really didn't have any public transport options back, and I had to take a taxi. So quite all right, but that happened because I improvised, and I could have of course checked the bus schedules before. In that case, I didn't know that I was gonna get inspired and want to paddle after midnight, which I almost never do, so that's not a common occurrence, but in that case it would have helped to check the options beforehand. So normally when I go out by public transport, which I do a lot, even if I'm expecting to be back by say 6 p.m. or whatever, I tend to check the options just in case there's a delay, just in case something goes wrong, you know, a number of hours later as well. When is the last option for the day if I needed to use it? And this is extra important if you travel to other cities like I do. I have this project called paddling in 100 cities, and I explore cities both in Sweden and in other countries. And of course in another country it's even more important to do your research properly. Things might not work as you expect them to, then you don't want to find yourself in a situation where there are only 2 or 3 buses per day and you just missed the last one, and maybe your phone battery died if you didn't bring that power bank, or maybe you don't have a signal and you're stuck somewhere. In that case, do you have basic gear to stay overnight? If not, then you kind of want to check those things out. So kind of having a bit of margin is always good. Of course, many times you can just improvise and happily go out paddling and you know, let the day take you where it takes you. But if you do a little bit of research and have it as a habit, it will save you a lot of trouble over time, because the more prepared you are, the more you've looked into backup options for your paddle routes, the more flexibility you're gonna have. I often do this, and especially in winter where it's more where I'm more vulnerable and I don't want to be, you know, stuck for a long time in freezing temperatures. with my portable kayak somewhere. In that case, it's really good to have 1 or 2 backup options, and since I, as you understand, use inflatable kayaks a lot, I really enjoy that flexibility. I mean, I love that flexibility to be able to go where I choose, and I often improvise. But it also means that it's a whole lot easier to improvise if I actually have planned beforehand or checked out different options, so that I know that I'm planning to go here, but I might go here as well if the mood strikes, and if something goes wrong, this is my backup option. For example, today I'm not in an inflatable kayak. I have this rental kayak, and it's a hard shell. I mean, I need to return it at the start location, and I have a number of possible routes that I could take, and of course I've looked into backup options that are shorter, that still are interesting for me, but I can't get up on land and take the train back. I mean, I have to return this thing, so I kind of really have to look into distances and such to have a sense of the paths I could take across the water if the wind changes, or I get tired or whatnot. And of course the worst case option would be asking somebody to come pick me up, but that's not the plan. So yeah, doing your homework, checking those routes really helps. Then of course, if you're in familiar areas and you know the options already, then it's just great to be able to just go out and improvise and adapt. And all that I'm saying here, it doesn't mean that I'm advocating for worrying all that much. It's simply that the more prepared you are, the more flexibility and the more safety you have, and the less likely you are to get into trouble. So I like to, perhaps over prepare sometimes a bit first, but then if things get difficult, I often discover that things are so much easier to handle because I already took a lot of scenarios into account. So having that as a habit, I find is helpful. And even so, we're back to the basic stuff. If you're in a familiar area, you don't really need to worry about backups and all of that. What you're really looking into is the basics that we started with: wind, weather forecasts, tides, local conditions, like a certain area will normally have a lot of waves. Plan your way around that. Plan your distance according to your capacity. Plan according to shelter from the wind, protection from boat traffic, risks that you might have there. Maybe there are ferries, cruise ferries, large ships passing, whatever might affect your route. Maybe there's a bird protection area. You should stay within a certain distance from shore. That might be something to take into account. In all cases, a little bit of planning goes a long way and makes for a lot of fun on the water, because you have the freedom to choose if you've done your homework. So that's a long speech about paddling and planning your paddling routes. Essentially, I'm just using the time here because I'm doing a long paddle today myself, a relaxed long paddle, and it's a good way to pass the time, to share some thoughts. So thank you for listening. I hope you find it useful, and of course there are a lot of other safety related videos and similar advice on this channel, Air on the Water. So feel free to go to check those out, like for example the paddling in boat traffic video, or the safety gear video, or we've mentioned paddling in colder conditions, so paddling in cold water or winter kayaking conditions. There's a video on that as well. So hope you find that useful, and if you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave those in the comments below. Happy paddles and all the best. Be safe out there. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe in order to stay updated on new videos and help others find information on this channel. Happy paddles!